Most people believe that power announces itself. They think the loudest voice in the room is the strongest one. They believe that to win, you must speak, argue, defend, and prove. Sun Tzu saw something entirely different. He watched armies fall not because they lacked strength, but because they could not stop talking. He watched kings crumble not because they were weak, but because they revealed everything too soon. And in the silence between battles, he discovered something that would outlast every sword ever forged. The most dangerous weapon a human being can possess is not a blade, not an army, and not even intelligence. It is the ability to say absolutely nothing and make the world afraid of what you might be thinking. This is not a passive skill. It is not the silence of the weak or the quiet of the uncertain. This is the deliberate, calculated, ruthless silence of the strategist who understands that words are currency, and like all currency, they lose value the more you spend them. In this video, you will learn how Sun Tzu weaponized silence across 5 dimensions that most people never consider. You will understand why the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. You will see how silence reshapes the psychology of everyone around you, how it forces others to reveal themselves, and how it plants a kind of fear that no threat or display of aggression could ever match. By the end, you will never look at silence the same way again. Sun Tzu understood something that separates strategists from ordinary people. Ordinary people react. They see something that provokes them, and they respond immediately, emotionally, and completely. They hand over every piece of information about who they are, what they fear, and what they value, all in a single impulsive sentence. Strategists observe. They receive the provocation, they feel it, and then they do something extraordinary. They do nothing. They say nothing. They let the moment pass like water over, stone smooth and unmoved. This is not restraint born from weakness. It is restraint born from an understanding of information warfare. Every word you speak in a moment of emotion is a map of your interior. It tells people where you are vulnerable, what you care about, and where to apply pressure next time. When you stay silent, you give them nothing. You become a locked room, and locked rooms, by their very nature, terrify people who need to feel in control. The silence communicates something, far more powerful than any comeback or argument ever could. It says that you are operating on a level they cannot access. Consider 2 people in a tense situation at work. One person, feeling accused or undermined, immediately defends themselves, explains their reasoning, and appeals to others for validation. In doing so, they reveal their anxiety, their need for approval, and their emotional investment in the outcome. The other person listens, nods almost imperceptibly, and says nothing of consequence. They offer no defense, no explanation, no visible reaction. To an observer, this second person is unreadable, and unreadable means dangerous. People do not fear what they understand. They fear what they cannot decode. Sun Tzu wrote that all warfare is based on deception. But the deepest deception is not creating a false impression of your strength. It is creating the impression that you have no limit, no edge, no point at which you can be provoked. When a person cannot find your edge, they cannot attack it. And when they cannot attack it, they begin to wonder if you even have one. That wonder is the beginning of fear. Not the fear that comes from a direct threat, but the far more unsettling fear that comes from complete uncertainty. The human mind cannot tolerate mystery for long. When someone fails to react the way we expect, our brain goes into overdrive. We begin to fill the silence with our own projections, our own anxieties, our own worst-case scenarios. This is perhaps the most profound psychological weapon silence provides. You are not doing anything. You are not threatening, intimidating, or even engaging, but the other person's mind is doing all the work for you, building a version of you that is far more formidable than any version you could construct yourself through words. This is the first lesson Sun Tzu mastered. Silence does not communicate nothing. It communicates everything, but only what the other person is afraid of. You become a mirror for their deepest insecurities. And when someone sees their own fear reflected back at them by someone who refuses to flinch, they experience something primal and deeply destabilizing. They experience the terror of the unknown, This is not psychological manipulation in the petty sense. This is strategic positioning at the highest level. You are not deceiving anyone, you are simply refusing to be read, and in that refusal you become something they cannot prepare for. But Sun Tzu warned about something even more dangerous than the fear of an obvious enemy. He warned about the danger of underestimating the power of apparent weakness. Most people confuse silence with submission. They see someone who does not argue, does not defend, and does not assert themselves loudly, and they mistake that person for easy prey. This is one of the most expensive mistakes a person can make, because silence is not submission. Silence is not the absence of power. Silence is power so concentrated, so controlled, so complete that it does not need to perform. There is a story often told among military historians about the nature of great commanders before battle. The generals who shouted the loudest, who gave the most passionate speeches, who promised the most dramatic victories, were frequently the ones who broke first when the plan met reality. The commanders who moved quietly, who spoke in measured tones, who gave orders without theatrics, were the ones whose soldiers followed into impossible conditions without hesitation. Why? Because those soldiers could feel the stillness at the center of their leader. And stillness, true stillness, communicates something that volume never can. It communicates certainty. Certainty does not need to be loud. Certainty does not need approval. A person who is truly certain of who they are, what they know, and what they are capable of does not need to convince you of it. They do not need your validation or your fear. They are simply present, fully and completely, in a way that makes everything around them feel slightly less stable by comparison. This is what silent power looks like in practice. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself, but it changes the temperature of every room it enters. Now apply this to the environments most people navigate every day. Think about the workplace, a space built on competition, status, and the constant negotiation of influence. In every meeting, every conversation, every interaction, there are people performing their competence loudly. They speak first, they speak often, and they mistake volume for value. Then there is the person who speaks rarely, but when they do, every word carries the weight of someone who has spent time thinking rather than talking, whose opinion carries more authority, whose silence before speaking makes others lean forward, whose words are remembered after the meeting ends. Sun Tzu understood that selective silence is not simply about withholding words. It is about creating contrast. When everything around you is noise, your silence becomes signal. It stands out. It communicates discipline. It communicates depth. And it creates in the minds of others a question they cannot stop asking. What is this person thinking? That question is not idle curiosity. That question is the beginning of fascination. And fascination is a precursor to influence. You do not need to control people directly. You need to occupy space in their thinking, and nothing. Occupy space in someone's mind, quite like the mystery of what you are not saying. Here is where most people make a fatal mistake. They confuse strategic silence with coldness or social failure. They think that not speaking means not connecting. But the opposite is true. The person who listens completely, who receives what others say without immediately preparing a response, who holds silence as a comfortable and natural state, rather than an awkward void to be filled, is the person others feel most deeply heard by. There is a profound irony here. By saying less, you communicate more care. By listening more completely, you create a stronger impression of presence. And presence, deep, genuine presence, is the rarest and most magnetic quality a person can possess. But Sun Tzu warned about something even more dangerous that happens when you begin to practice silence strategically. The people around you will resist it, not openly, not consciously, but deeply and instinctively. When you stop reacting on cue, when you stop providing the emotional feedback that others have come to depend on, they become uncomfortable. And uncomfortable people do predictable things. They probe, they escalate, they try new tactics to get a response from you. They may become warmer to draw you out, or colder to punish you, or more dramatic to force a reaction. And in all of this, they reveal themselves completely. This is the second dimension of silence as strategy. When you go quiet, others go loud. And When they go loud, they show you everything. They show you what they value, what they fear losing, what tactics they rely on, and what pressure they apply when they feel out of control. You are not just protecting your own information by staying silent. You are actively gathering intelligence. Every reaction they have to your stillness is data. Every escalation, every shift in tone, every attempt to destabilize you is a window into how they operate and what they are afraid of. Sun Tzu wrote that, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Silence is how you learn the enemy without fighting. You simply stop giving them a target, stop feeding the dynamic they are trying to create, and watch what they do next. What they do next tells you everything you need to know about where they are willing to go and what they are willing to sacrifice to get a reaction from you." This is intelligence gathering at its most elegant. You never asked a single question. You never went looking for information. You simply became still and the truth walked right toward you. Think about how this applies in negotiations, in relationships, in conflicts both professional and personal. The person who can maintain composure while the other side escalates, who can sit with silence while pressure mounts, who can resist the deeply human urge to fill the void with explanation or justification, that person controls the frame of every interaction they enter. They control it not through aggression or authority, but through the simple, devastating power of not needing the interaction to go any particular way. Desperation speaks loudly and invites exploitation. Stillness speaks quietly and commands respect. There is a phenomenon in negotiation that experienced practitioners know well. When you make an offer and then go completely silent, the discomfort of that silence almost always works in your favor. The other party, unable to tolerate the uncertainty, begins to negotiate against themselves. They fill the silence with concessions, with explanations, with adjustments you never asked for. You said nothing, but silence did the work. This is not manipulation. This is the natural result of understanding that silence creates pressure, and pressure reveals priorities. When you know someone's priorities, you know how to reach any outcome that serves both parties. Now comes the dimension of silence that Sun Tzu found most powerful of all, and the one that most people overlook entirely. It is the silence of accumulated action without announcement. The strategist who moves without speaking of their moves, who builds without displaying what they are building, who prepares without warning of their preparation, achieves something that no amount of announced intention can. They achieve surprise, and surprise, in strategy as in life, is worth more than any amount of declared strength. Most people announce what they are going to do before they do. Yet they share their plans, their goals, their ambitions with anyone who will listen, and in doing so, they invite opposition, skepticism, interference, and sometimes sabotage. Not from enemies, from the ordinary human resistance that forms the moment someone is given time to prepare a counter-argument. When you move in silence, when you let your results speak before your intentions do, you remove that preparation time entirely. By the time the world sees what you have done, it is already done. There is nothing left to argue with. There is only the reality you have created. Sun Tzu understood that the most effective campaign is the one that is over before the opponent realizes it has begun. In business, in relationships, in personal growth, this principle is worth more than any motivational framework or productivity system you will ever encounter. Stop talking about what you are going to do. Stop announcing your transformations. Stop seeking premature validation for goals you have not yet achieved. Go quiet. Go to work. Let the outcome speak when it arrives. The silence in between is not emptiness. It is construction. Consider the person who tells everyone about the book they are going to write, the business they are going to start, the transformation they are going to undergo. Every time they announce it, they receive social validation that partially satisfies the desire that would otherwise fuel the work. They spend the energy of ambition in conversation instead of creation. Then consider the person who simply disappears into their work and emerges with something real. Which person do you respect more? Which person's story has more power? The silence was not absence. The silence was the work. But there is one more dimension to this, and it is perhaps the one that Sun Tzu held closest. It is the silence that exists not as a tactic, but as a state. Not silence deployed strategically in specific situations, but silence as a fundamental orientation toward life and interaction. The strategist who has mastered this does not use silence. They are silent. They carry within them a stillness that is not the absence of thought or feeling, but the result of having so thoroughly processed thought and feeling that they are no longer driven by them. They have become the eye of the storm, fully aware of everything moving around them, moved by none of it. This is the highest form of what Sun Tzu described as knowing yourself. Most people know their opinions. They know their preferences, their reactions, their emotional patterns, but they do not know themselves in the deeper sense. They do not know the place inside them that exists before opinion, before reaction, before the story they tell themselves about who they are. The person who finds that place and learns to operate from it becomes something rare and genuinely formidable, not because they have trained themselves to suppress their reactions, but because they have gone so deep into themselves that the ordinary provocations of life simply do not reach where they live. Here is where the fear comes from, not from anything the silent person does, but from what it suggests about them. When someone cannot be provoked, cannot be destabilized, cannot be read, the people around them begin to wonder what they are dealing with. They begin to project, and in that projection, they inevitably construct something larger and more intimidating than the reality. The silent person becomes, in the imagination of others, a version of themselves amplified and perfected. They become whatever the observer most fears encountering. This is the ultimate strategic advantage. You are not creating an image. You are simply refusing to correct the one they create for themselves. Sun Tzu wrote that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. This is what complete silence achieves at its highest level. The conflict never fully materializes because the other party, unable to get a grip on you, unable to find your weakness or your edge, decides consciously or unconsciously that the cost of escalation is too high. You have won not by defeating them, but by becoming something they do not know how to engage. This is not domination. This is transcendence. You have simply moved to a level of the game they are not playing. Now consider the emotional dimension of this practice, because silence is not just strategic. It is deeply personal. The person who has learned to be genuinely comfortable in silence, who does not fill quiet moments with noise or distraction or performance, who can sit with another person in complete silence and feel no anxiety, no need to manage the moment or fill the space, that person has access to a quality of presence that most humans spend their entire lives craving without knowing how to find it. Silence is not lonely. Silence is intimacy with yourself, and intimacy with yourself is the foundation of every form of genuine power. Most people are afraid of silence because silence forces them to confront what is actually there. The thoughts they have been avoiding, the feelings they have been numbing, the truths they have been outrunning. The noise of modern life is not accidental. It is, in large part, a collective agreement to keep the silence at bay because the silence asks questions that are uncomfortable to answer. Who are you when there is nothing to react to? What do you actually want when no one is watching? What do you actually believe when you stop performing your beliefs for an audience? The strategist who has walked into that silence and sat with those questions, who has faced the discomfort and emerged with actual answers rather than borrowed ones, carries a different quality of certainty than the person who has never stopped to ask. And that certainty, as we have already seen, is the most magnetic and most feared quality a human being can possess. It is not arrogance. It is not the brittle certainty of someone who has never been challenged. It is the quiet certainty of someone who has challenged themselves more ruthlessly than anyone else ever could, and come out knowing who they are and what they are made of. This is the final lesson that Sun Tzu embedded in everything he wrote and everything he lived. The warrior who is most dangerous is not the one with the most weapons or the most soldiers or the most aggressive strategy. The warrior most dangerous is the one who has achieved complete stillness within. Because from that stillness, every action they take is precise, considered, and free from the noise of ego. They do not need to win. They simply need to be. And being fully, authentically, and without apology is a form of power that no aggression can match and no manipulation can undermine. You have now walked through 5 dimensions of the most underestimated weapon in the history of human strategy. You have seen how silence controls information, how it generates fear through mystery, how it turns the environment into an intelligence-gathering operation, how it preserves the energy of ambition for actual creation, and how, at its deepest level, it is not a tactic at all, but a state of being that transforms every interaction without requiring a single word. Sun Tzu did not discover silence as a trick, he discovered it as a truth, and that truth is this: the person who needs nothing from you has everything over you. Most people spend their lives trying to be heard, trying to convince, to persuade, to prove, to justify, to explain. And in all of that effort, they leak power continuously, steadily, invisibly. They give it away in every reaction, every defense, every moment of visible vulnerability. The strategist does something different. The strategist conserves. Not out of coldness or disconnection, but out of a deep understanding that power is not generated by display. Power is generated by depth, and depth requires silence, because silence is where the real work happens. The next time you feel the urge to defend yourself when it is not necessary, stay silent. The next time you want to announce a plan before it is complete, stay silent. The next time someone provokes you and waits for your reaction, give them something they are not prepared for. Give them nothing. Watch what happens in the space that opens up. Watch how the dynamic shifts. Watch how the room reorganizes itself around your stillness. You will begin to understand in a way that no amount of explanation can convey why Sun Tzu said that the greatest victory is the one that requires no battle. The greatest power is the one that requires no performance, and the most feared presence is the one that needs no words to be known. Silence is not the end of the conversation. It is the beginning of a different kind of language, one spoken not in words, but in weight, in stillness, in the quality of attention you bring to every moment. Master that language, and you will never need to raise your voice again, because those who have learned to hear it will already know exactly who they are dealing with, and those who have not will spend the rest of the interaction trying to figure it out, which means you have already won. This is the art Sun Tzu left behind, not just on the battlefield, not just in the strategies that toppled kingdoms and ended wars before they began, but in the quiet truth that lives at the center of every human interaction. Power does not shout. Power does not explain. Power does not need you to understand it or approve of it or be impressed by it. Power simply is. And when you find that stillness within yourself, when you discover that you can be fully present without needing anything from the moment, you will understand why the most feared warriors in history were often also the quietest. They had nothing to prove because they had already proven everything to themselves. And in that silence, they became unstoppable.